today's lesson that we want to have is about the vessels that are used for the Mass, the things that are needed to offer the Holy Mass. So first of all, for Mass, we have to have bread and wine and a priest, which was what at the Last Supper. Jesus was the great priest. He instituted the sacrament for his first priests, the apostles. So we need bread and wine. So bread is in the form of hosts that we use at Mass. So the big round white host is the one that the priest uses and elevates it at the consecration so that everyone can see it, so it's bigger. The smaller hosts for all the people at Holy Communion, they're consecrated usually in a ciborium. So this is the ciborium. Usually a ciborium will have a lid on it in order to protect the hosts from dust or bugs or anything. And we see that this one is made out of gold-plated, and it's precious because why? Because after the consecration, it holds the very body of Christ, the consecrated hosts. So this is called the ciborium. The chalice, we put the wine in the chalice at the offertory, and then at the consecration, it becomes the blood of Christ. So a chalice is required to be made out of precious metals, precious things. This one is gold too. And the inside of the cup is to be at least plated with a very precious metal, because this is the most valuable thing in the world. This is the blood of Christ. This particular chalice was given to me by my father at my ordination, and in fact it has a little diamond in here, which was from the diamond ring of my grandmother. She wanted, if one of her grandchildren became a priest, to have her diamond put into the chalice. So I did, in memory of her. So, as I mentioned at the offertory, we bring forth the bread and the wine, and the water and the wine is brought in cruets. So we have the cruets that the altar boys will bring over to the priest. And then also at the offertory is the lavabo, when the priest does the symbolic washing of his fingers. And so we have the bowl is called the lavabo, and then there's a towel that is used that is called the finger towel for drying off the priest's fingers. At the time of Holy Communion, the altar boys will use the paten. So the paten is placed under the chin, so when the person received Holy Communion, if any particles might fall, or if a host might fall, he would catch it, catch those particles. And oftentimes after communion, there's a few particles on there that have to be purified from the paten. I should mention that with the chalice, the priest often is using what's called a purificator. This little linen is used to dab up any possible drops of the precious blood or anything that's associated with the use of the chalice. Now I'd like to take you up to the altar and just point out a few things to you, okay? So here we are at the altar, and I wanted to show you a couple of things here that happen at the altar as we're offering Mass. First of all, an altar is always covered with a altar cloth. So it's a long altar cloth, and the length of the altar, and then often hanging down all the way to the bottom. This cloth obviously protects the altar, protects the altar, which is a symbol of Christ, but also it calls to mind that shroud that Jesus was wrapped in when in his burial shroud, because Jesus himself will be offered here on the altar, representing his life, death, and his resurrection here on the altar. Also, a small cloth called a corporal from the word for body, corpus, is placed on the altar always as we prepare for Mass. So the corporal is unfolded and placed here because this is where the sacred action will happen. So on this corporal will be placed the paten with the host, and the chalice, and the ciborium. So they will be placed here on the corporal. Whatever is to be consecrated will be placed on the corporal. Why is it called a corporal? And what is it about? Well, the corporal, first of all, protects. So this area is protected so that if there's any particles or any drops of the precious blood that might come down, they will be caught on the corporal. And the corporal then is carefully folded up and protected. And it's cleansed in a special way. But also symbolically, this little corporal is a symbol of the swaddling clothes that Jesus was in when he was born. And why would we say that? Because Jesus is born here unto our altar at Mass, at Holy Mass. He comes down from heaven, just as he came down from heaven when he came into the world in the Incarnation. And so we are reliving at Holy Mass the whole life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. So the corporal, the whole altar cloth, and the sacred altar. So now let's go back to the sacristy. So here we are, we're back in the sacristy here at St. John Vianney. And I want to show you one more thing as we complete this lesson for today. And that is how to dress a chalice. That is how to prepare the chalice for Mass. So we have here our chalice. And the first thing that we'll do is we'll take what we said before was a purificator that the priest uses for purifying any thing associated with the chalice. And we place that onto the chalice, like that. Then what do we need? We need a host. We put the small host in the ciborium before Mass, and then a big host is placed here on what's called another type of paten. Of course, this is just bread because it hasn't been consecrated yet at Mass. So the host is put on the paten, and the paten is then placed on top. After that, we want to put on what's called the pall. You may have seen the priest using the pall during Mass to cover the chalice. And the reason is to protect the contents of the chalice, the precious blood, from any dust that might get in or any bugs that might get in. And bugs are a real problem sometimes when there's a lot of flowers around the altar. It's not uncommon at all to see little tiny flies trying to get in to the chalice, and so the necessity of covering it. And especially in churches in the old days that didn't have air conditioning or screens and wide open doors, lots of bugs. So we use the pall all the time just in case. Now we want to veil the chalice. So we have the veil. Why the veil? Well, veils are used to call to mind something that's sacred. So we have a veil on the tabernacle to call to mind that this is sacred. We cover the chalice as it's prepared for Mass to remind ourselves that this sacred vessel and these are used for a very sacred purpose. And also, sisters who are consecrated to God will often wear their veil to show that they are consecrated to God, and women in church might wear a veil to call to mind their closeness and their commitment to the Lord. So we veil the chalice. Then we have what's called a burse. The burse has a pocket in it, and it's used to hold the corporal, which we mentioned up at the altar. Corporals, since it's the very place where the consecration takes place, could always have perhaps a small particle of the sacred host. And so corporals are always folded up very carefully, and then they're kept in the burse to keep them safe, so that whenever it's transported around, it's always kept safely in the burse. And then we may put the tabernacle key on top of the chalice so that Father is all ready to go for Mass. So hopefully this little lesson helps and understand some of the things about the Holy Mass.